The coin tin was lighter than it should have been. I remember standing in the wash house with my hands still wet, counting it twice, because counting it once didn't feel real. $17. $17, when I had folded almost $400 into that tin over 6 months, wage by wage, dollar by dollar, from the nursing home in town. My husband's boots were still by the door. The kitchen clock ticked the way it always ticked, steady, unbothered, like it hadn't just watched someone go through my hiding place. I remember my hand tightening around the tin lid until the metal edge bit into my palm, and I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like when a secret you've kept for months finally starts leaking out from under the door. If you've ever loved someone inside a world with different rules than the one you grew up in, and felt that gap widen quietly under your feet until you didn't know which ground was yours anymore, you're going to understand this story. If you enjoy true stories about faith, family, and the hidden costs of belonging to a community that isn't quite your own, you're in the right place. Let's begin. I wasn't born a Hutterite. I need you to understand that first, because everything that happened to me only makes sense once you know where I started. I grew up Mennonite, in a small conservative community where the men drove buggies some years and pickup trucks other years, depending on which church district we belonged to, and where my father owned our farm outright, the deed in his name, the way it had been in his father's name before him. We were plain people, but we were not communal people. What a man earned, a man kept. What a woman sewed and sold at the roadside stand, she kept too, tucked into her own tin or her own drawer, and nobody thought twice about it. Privacy of purse was just privacy of purse. Nobody called it pride. We wore plain clothes too, of course, though even that was different in ways an outsider might not notice at first glance. My dresses were a certain cut, my head covering a certain shape, and I'd grown up hearing that Amish dress rules could be even stricter in some districts, and Hutterite dress had its own patterns entirely, small printed fabrics instead of solid colors, aprons tied a particular way. I didn't know yet how much those small differences in cloth and cut would come to mean to me. At the time they were just what people wore. I had no idea a woman could feel like a stranger in her own skirt. I met my husband at a produce auction 2 counties over, of all places, where Mennonite and Hutterite families sometimes crossed paths without meaning to. He was quiet in the way that made you want to know what he was thinking. He wore the same dark trousers and button shirt every Hutterite man I'd ever seen wore, and he spoke a German dialect thicker and older than the one I'd grown up hearing, and when he asked permission to write to me, he asked it like a man asking permission to breathe. I should tell you now, because it matters later, that a Hutterite colony holds everything in common. Not most things. Everything. The land, the machinery, the kitchen, the wages of every working member. All of it flows into one common purse, managed by the colony's stewards, and every family draws only what they need from that shared well. It is not stinginess. It is a conviction, older than any of us, that private wealth divides a community the way private grudges do. I found that beautiful, at first. I found it beautiful the way you find a hard winter beautiful from inside a warm kitchen. My own mother didn't understand it at all when I first explained it to her. She sat at our kitchen table back home, turning the idea over like a stone she wasn't sure was safe to pick up, and asked me plainly how a woman was supposed to buy her own daughter a birthday gift if she didn't have a cent that was only hers to spend. I didn't have a good answer for her then. I'm not sure I have a perfect one now, either, though I understand the reasoning a great deal better than I did. We married in his colony's way, not mine. I remember the wedding meal stretching down 2 long tables, communal to its bones, every dish cooked in the colony kitchen by women who were now, officially, my sisters. I remember thinking I had never felt so surrounded and so alone in the same breath. That was the first small clue, though I didn't know to call it that yet, the way I kept counting faces at that wedding, looking for one that looked like home. The second clue came a week later, when my husband's mother handed me a plain black purse, colony issued, and told me gently that whatever I earned from outside work would go into the common account on Fridays. I nodded. I didn't understand yet how hard that sentence would become. The third clue was smaller still, a letter from my own mother, back in my home community, asking almost casually whether I still had my own little savings, the way Mennonite women always did. I wrote back and told her yes, of course, because at the time it was still true. For a while, it was good. It really was. There is a kind of peace in communal living I hadn't expected. Nobody eating alone, nobody grieving alone. Children raised by 40 pairs of loving hands instead of 2 tired ones. I want you to know that before I tell you what went wrong, because this isn't a story about a bad place. It's a story about 2 good worlds that didn't always fit together, and about me standing in the seam between them. The trouble started the year my mother got sick. Not colony business. Not Hutterite business. My mother, back in the Mennonite community I'd left, needed medicine our insurance through the colony didn't cover, needed help with her farm chores since my father's hands had gone stiff with arthritis, needed money in a way that had nothing to do with my new family and everything to do with my old one. Have you ever loved 2 families who didn't answer to each other? I took a job at the nursing home in town, with the colony's blessing, the way some Hutterite women do when outside work is needed and permitted. Every Friday I brought my wages home and put them in the common purse, same as always. But every other week, I skimmed a little. $10 here. 15 there. I told myself it wasn't stealing, because it was my own labor, my own hands, my own tired feet on that linoleum floor 12 hours a shift. I told myself my mother's medicine mattered more than a rule written by men who'd never met her. I hid it in a coffee tin behind the canning jars, in the root cellar, where nobody but me ever went in summer. What would you have done in my place? The beats started then, and they repeated themselves in a rhythm I still remember in my sleep. I'd bring home my wages, hand over most of it, hide the rest, feel my chest tighten with relief and shame in the same 5 minutes. Then a week would pass in ordinary colony life, communal breakfast, communal chores, my husband's quiet kindness, and just when I'd almost forgotten the weight of it, some small unexplained thing would happen. A steward asking, offhand, whether my hours had changed. My mother-in-law commenting that the nursing home must not pay as well as she'd thought. My husband, one evening, holding my hand a beat longer than usual and asking if something was troubling me, in a voice too gentle for a guilty woman to survive without flinching. Have you ever felt like the people who loved you most were the ones you were most afraid of? There was a night that fall when the whole colony gathered for a wedding of one of my husband's younger cousins, and I stood at the edge of the singing with a paper cup of coffee going cold in my hands, watching the bride's mother tuck a folded bill into her daughter's palm as a private little gift, quick and quiet, the kind of gesture that would have gotten a raised eyebrow if anyone official had seen it. Nobody said a word against her. I understood then that even inside a fully communal life, small private currents still ran under the surface, small kindnesses nobody made a rule against because nobody expected them to need one. It made my own hidden tin feel less like a crime and more like a current I hadn't been given permission to swim in. That didn't make it right. It only made it human. The friction came to a head on an ordinary Sunday, after fellowship meal, when my husband's uncle, a minister in the colony, made an offhand remark about Mennonite families and their private purses, the way some plain men do when they've never had to live inside a different set of rules. He didn't mean cruelty by it. He meant it the way you'd remark on a neighboring farm's strange way of stacking hay. But something in me went hot and small at once. I said, more sharply than I meant to, that my own father's farm and my own mother's sickness weren't going to wait on a colony vote, and the table went quiet, the particular kind of quiet that follows a woman speaking a truth nobody asked for. My husband didn't scold me. He just looked at me the way you look at a fence post you didn't know was leaning until the wind showed you. That night I cried into a dish towel in the wash house so nobody would hear, and I told myself it was the last time I'd take even $1 that wasn't mine to take. I told myself that for 3 more months, and I meant it every single time. And every single time my mother's next letter arrived thinner and more tired than the last, I broke my own promise again. Have you ever made a promise to yourself you knew, even as you made it, you weren't strong enough to keep? The tin behind the canning jars grew heavier through the fall. Almost $400 by the time the first snow came, folded so tight the bills had creases like old hands. I told myself once my mother was steady again, I'd stop, I'd confess it. I'd make it right somehow, though I never let myself picture how. Then came the evening the tin was light. My husband found it 2 days before I did. He told me later he hadn't gone looking, he'd gone down for canning jars for his mother, same as any ordinary errand, and the tin had simply been sitting wrong on the shelf, tilted, its lid loose, and something in him, some instinct a careful man carries, made him lift it. He didn't confront me in the kitchen with the clock ticking, though that's the moment I remember clearest, because that's the moment I found the tin light and understood he already knew. He waited until the children were asleep. He sat across from me at the table, his big careful hands folded in front of him, and he set the tin down between us like a small, quiet accusation. "Where did the rest of it go?" he said. Not angry, just tired. The way a man gets tired holding a question too long. I told him everything then, in short broken pieces, the way confession comes out of a person who's been carrying it alone too long. My mother's medicine. My father's stiff hands. The farm that couldn't wait on colony votes. I told him I'd been raised Mennonite, raised to believe what I earned was partly mine to give where I chose, and I hadn't known how to unlearn that fast enough to save my own mother. He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that I heard the wind outside pushing against the window glass. Long enough that I started rehearsing, in my head, every way this marriage might end. "You should have told me," he said finally. "Not the colony first. Me first." That sentence undid me more than any scolding could have. Because he was right. I hadn't been hiding money from a system. I'd been hiding it from him, from the one person who might have understood both halves of me at once, and I hadn't trusted him enough to try. He took the tin to the steward himself the next morning. I don't know exactly what was said in that meeting, only that colony discipline for a first honest confession is gentler than for a hidden pattern discovered by someone else, and that my husband stood beside me the whole time instead of a step behind. The colony made an allowance, in the end, a small, quiet exception for family need outside the community, the kind that gets made more often than outsiders assume, once honesty replaces secrecy. Silence costs more than any dollar ever does. I think that's the truest thing I learned that year, and I've never stopped believing it since. My mother's medicine got paid for anyway, openly this time, with the colony's knowledge and even, eventually, a little of the colony's own help, once my husband explained her situation at a meeting I wasn't even in the room for. My mother-in-law started writing to my mother directly the following spring, 2 women from 2 different plain worlds trading recipes and health complaints in careful, curious letters, as if the space between Mennonite and Hutterite life was smaller than either of them had been raised to think. Last fall, my mother came to visit the colony for the first time. I watched her sit at our long communal table, 60 years of Mennonite habit in her bones, and pass a dish to a stranger's child without being asked, and something in my chest finally unclenched all the way. My husband sat beside her and asked, genuinely, how a Mennonite farm keeps its books, and she laughed and told him, and for the first time in years I felt like I was standing on one piece of ground instead of 2. Before she left, she pressed a little embroidered handkerchief into my mother-in-law's hands, the old Mennonite habit of a private gift between women, and my mother-in-law took it without a moment's hesitation, the way you take something offered in love rather than something owed. The coin tin still sits on that shelf behind the canning jars. It's full now, openly, honestly, everyone's business instead of my secret, and somehow that makes it heavier in the best way a thing can be heavy. If you've ever hidden something out of love instead of malice, You already know how much lighter the truth feels once it's finally out in the open. If this story moved you, I'd love to know. Have you ever had to choose between the family that raised you and the family you married into? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this, please like the video and subscribe, because I've got more true stories from inside plane communities coming soon. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next story.